Welcome. So the topic of my talk today is my food killing me? But before I dive into that topic, I want to share my story. Some people might recognise this person. It's not me. It's the character out of the movie Oliver Twist. And for those of you who don't know that story, Oliver lived in an orphanage and a workhouse and had access to a very tasty food product called gruel. Now the reason that I mention this is because I think I share a lot of, the same interests as Oliver. But the main one is that I love food. And fun fact, when I was 11 years old, actually, I played the character of Oliver Twist in the Junior Amateur Theatrical Society production of this musical. And it got to me thinking when I was preparing for this presentation about Oliver Twist and how lucky he was. He had access to a plant-based diet, he had access to regular exercise, and he didn't have to worry about some of the awful diseases that we have to contend with these days. Things like obesity, things like diabetes, things like cardiovascular disease. And he's not likely to have to contend with dementia. So he's so lucky. So here he is, however, making a poor choice. He's asking for more food. For me, he's the real villain in this movie. So like Oliver, I love food too. And it's really appropriate that I ended up being a professor of food science because every day I get to work with a group of budding food scientists to help solve some of our great mysteries around food. But before I continue, I just want to share with you something which is quite sad, I guess. And unfortunately, I'm dying. So I went to the doctor recently and she confirmed it. She couldn't give me a date. She said, I don't know, maybe 1 year, maybe 20 years, maybe 50 years. She wasn't sure. She couldn't confirm it. But what she did say is that, Chris, you're likely to live longer if you lose some weight. I said, well, okay, what do I do? She said, well, there's been some really good research done in plant-based diets recently. Why don't you give that a go? So, okay, sounds good. So I went on a strict 3-month vegan diet, ate no meat products whatsoever. Probably worst 3 months of my life. It was terrible. It was expensive. I really struggled to find good options often, and often the options that I would fall back onto were not that healthy anyway. So after 3 months, I weighed myself. I hadn't lost any weight whatsoever. I didn't feel any better. So I thought, maybe I should try something else. So what I tried was to download one of these new apps that help measure your calorie intake. Use that and targeted about a 1,200 calorie intake. And in about 6 months, I lost 15 kilos. It was really good. I didn't have to give up much at all. Probably happiness was one, the will to live at times, but I could do it. And I think if I can do it, anyone can do it. But wouldn't it be good to be able to do that and for it not to be so painful? Because at the moment, our only options really are to reduce our calorie intake, increase our activity, or turn to things like medication or surgery. So wouldn't it be great if we had food that actually could make you healthier the more that you ate? So there's been a lot of debate in the media around who's to blame for all these toxic foods that we're being exposed to at the moment. And the reality is that we are all dying, and we are all dying because of the food that we're eating. So who is to blame? So like any good scientist, to try and find this out, I went straight to Google. And Google told me these things. So Google told me that, well, actually, it's the plant breeders. They are making these toxic wheat varieties which are full of gluten, which are making us sick. Well, that's interesting. Google also said that these new GMO foods are all toxic. If you eat them, you'll die. Okay, that's interesting. So actually, we thought we might look into this and see if we could either prove it or disprove it and bust that myth. So two of my students worked on this project of trying to understand how the gluten has changed in wheat varieties over the years. So what we did is we sourced about 100 varieties dating back from about 150 years, and we developed a method where we could extract the protein, separate it into individual peptides, and then measure the amount of the peptides which are involved in causing celiac disease. And if we look at the level of those peptides over the years, we can actually see they really haven't changed at all. If anything, there's probably less of those proteins in our modern wheat varieties. So certainly it's not the wheat breeders which are making us sick. And when you look at the GMO debate, it's a really interesting one. And this is an area that I've worked in the past, and this is some of the research that we did in the past, where Ella developed a type of rice which is actually healthier. And the way that she did that was that she turned off some of the genes in the lipid biosynthesis pathway to create a rice which was higher in oleic acid. And oleic acid is a healthy fatty acid which is associated with a whole range of health benefits. The sad thing is that this research didn't go anywhere, because unfortunately there was a small group of people who spread a whole lot of lies about GM amongst the community, and now everybody's too scared to consume that, and so processors are too scared to produce products, and breeding companies are too scared to release GM products. So we've really lost that technology, which is a great shame, because as you can see, we can do amazing things to improve the nutrition of food by using GM technology. So another area that we've been working with the breeding companies around is in this area of digestibility. So one of the problems that we have with food, particularly high starchy foods, is that if we consume them regularly, what we actually find is that we get a spike of glucose after each meal. And that can be problematic, particularly if we're doing that day after day. Eventually, we might develop things like diabetes. So what we're trying to do is actually develop varieties of rice which actually digest slower. So we developed a screening technique where we could screen a whole bunch of different varieties to look at the rate at which the glucose is released into our bloodstream. And so now that we have that system, we can actually develop new varieties which, when we eat them, are not going to give you that high spike of glucose in your blood. So that's potentially going to have an enormous impact on the population if we can reduce the incidence of diabetes. Another area that we're working with the Australian rice breeding program is in this particular crop here, which is purple rice. So you can see here the actual plant is purple, but when you harvest the rice from those plants, it's purple as well. And we've found some remarkable properties of this rice, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But you can see here, actually, the breeders are doing their best to make healthier products. So I don't think we can blame the breeders for the health crisis that we're in. So a lot of people blame processors. Fair enough. I guess the thing that I hear a lot is that all highly processed food is bad for you. And sure, Sometimes when we're processing food, we do lose some of our nutrients, that's for sure. But what we've tried to develop is an understanding of, well, is it all processing which is negative, or actually can processing help nutrition? And what we found is some examples of where actually during processing we actually maintain the nutrition, or in some cases improve the nutrition. So an example of this is some work that Aduba did looking at sorghum, and specifically what she did was took sorghum and fermented it, which is a process. So the process of fermentation, she found, actually improved some of the compositional properties of the sorghum. So we saw some new antioxidant compounds being formed, and we actually saw some new compounds which we think might have anti-cancer properties. So that's a good example of where processing actually improves the health properties of a food product. Another really good example is again back with rice. So using our assay, we were able to look at the glycemic index, or the digestibility of rice processed in different ways. So you might have seen on the shelf those little pouches of rice which have been pre-cooked. So what we did is we looked at different ways of producing those, and then looking at the digestibility, or the glycemic index, of those products. And what we found is that compared to normal rice, which actually digests pretty quickly, compared to the normal rice, our processed rice actually release glucose at a much slower rate. And so that means if you're eating this rice, actually you're getting less of a glucose spike, and so that's much easier for your body to deal with, and long term you have less chance of getting things like diabetes. So it's a great example of where the food processing industry is improving our health outcomes. Another example was when Drew developed bread made with both wheat flour and lentil flour. And the good thing about that is that lentils contain these phenolic compounds with antioxidant properties, which add a real both flavour and health benefit to bread. And what we found is the good thing about these phenolic compounds is that they're very robust. So even through the cooking process, we found that those compounds survived out into the finished product, which is great news, because it means that any phenolic compounds that we're putting in our products, we can actually maintain them and their functionality through the food processing. Sim also found that with faba beans, if you roast them, you can actually maintain those phenolic compounds and maintain their activity as well, which is good news. So it's another example of how robust things like phenolic acids are in terms of surviving the food processing. So another way that we're trying to use food processing to improve the health outcomes of consumers is to actually develop new products. So this one here that Steve was working on with Uncle Toby's is actually a flake, and we've seen flakes before in terms of oat flakes and other flakes, but this one's actually made with whole pulses. And the good thing about that is that pulses are very high in protein, they're high in phenolic compounds and other compounds which deliver health benefits to consumers. So he's successfully been able to adapt the process of Uncle Toby to produce these pulse-based products, which are going to be much healthier for us into the future. Another really interesting project we're working on at the moment is the development of a new kind of wheat bix. So wheat bix are fantastic, they're a great product. They're made from whole wheat, so they contain all those phenolic acids that we're interested in the brand. But the problem with wheat bix is that if you're celiac, you can't eat them because they're made of wheat. So one approach is to use rice in making that. So we're working with Sanitarium to develop a process to make a healthy and stable product for consumption by celiacs. Okay, so we've worked out that it's not the breeders that are killing us, it's not the processors that are killing us. So who is it? And of course it's us. We're killing ourselves. And we're killing ourselves by making poor choices. So what our research is aimed at is helping us make better choices about food by better understanding that food. Specifically, better understanding the potential health benefits of that food. So one of the ways that we do this, and I've already mentioned phenolic acids before, and this is how we analyse our food to determine the composition of the food in terms of its phenolic acid composition and its antioxidant levels. So we take our, in this case, purple barley, and we extract out those phenolic acids using some particular solvents, and then we run it through this machine here, which is called a HPLC. And what that does is separate out all the different compounds in that extract. And so what we can do is identify those compounds and determine by the size of the peak how much of that compound is there. And the other really cool thing that we can do, at the same time, we've got a way of measuring the antioxidant capacity of those individual compounds. So when we do this analysis, we're always keenly looking at this bottom area of this chromatograph to see if we can find some big antioxidant peaks, because we know that they can deliver some really good health benefits to us in our diet. And then we can also take those extracts and put them into a range of different assays, and those assays might be to look at how they inhibit particular enzymes or how they interact with cells and how they maybe change gene expression in those cells. So there's a lot of great things that we can do, and then of course we can also feed those things to animals as well to measure the health impact on those animals. So some of the work that we've done in this antioxidant area, Borkway found that in purple barley there was a lot of really excellent antioxidants there. So that was really interesting. Compared to this purple barley, actually not too much at all. Shawani found that in oats there's actually lots of these things called levananthamides, which are very good for you. And that's why I think Oliver Twist was so lucky, because gruel is made out of oats. So he was getting a great dose of antioxidants every day, and that's why he was so healthy. So Shawani also looked at rice and found some really awesome antioxidants in rice as well. But Esther looked at purple rice, and the level of antioxidants in this is completely off the scale. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a minute. But we've really identified this as a very exciting crop that potentially is going to be able to deliver some amazing health benefits. Nancy looked at rice bran, and rice bran is important because it's a byproduct of rice milling, and Sunrice used to feed that to animals, but now are retaining that, putting it through a stabilisation process where they heat it so that it becomes shelf stable. And they need to do that so that it doesn't become rancid. So what we were interested in is, well, what happens during that stabilisation process? And the good news is that actually after that stabilisation process, we've still got all our great antioxidants, and actually we sometimes find that there's some new ones emerge as well. So that's really exciting. Sorghum is another grain that we like to work on, and you may not know much about sorghum, but it's actually the 5th largest cereal crop in Australia. It's grown more in northern New South Wales and Queensland, so we don't see it much around the Wagga area. But most of the sorghum that we grow is this red colour. There are some white ones, but mostly it's red. And if we look at the antioxidants of that, we can actually see that it's pretty good. It's got some really interesting compounds there. But we've been doing some work on this black variety, and it is amazing. So antioxidants are really abundant in that, and we think that there's some really exciting potential health benefits of this one. So going a step forward, past just looking at antioxidants and phenolic compounds, there's a number of different assays that we can do to try and determine the potential health benefits of some of these products. So in this case, Nancy did an assay where she was actually looking at whether or not that we think rice bran extracts can actually have an impact on inflammation, and they do. And what she found was that in a number of situations, the rice bran extracts interact with the cells, affect the genes involved in the production of cytokines, and changes the amount of cytokines associated with inflammation. So that's really interesting to think that actually the things that we're eating, these phenolic compounds, are actually interacting with the cells in our body and potentially changing their function. So Sim, when she was working on faba beans, conducted some assays using this enzyme here called angiotensin converting enzyme, or ACE. So ACE is an enzyme which is responsible for managing your blood pressure. So if we can modify or alter the activity of ACE, then we can potentially change your blood pressure. So what she found was actually some of these faba bean extracts can actually inhibit that enzyme, which actually results in a reduction in blood pressure. So we're starting to see that some of these food extracts potentially can act directly with our cells, directly with enzymes in our body to affect our physiology. Adiola found something similar, but this was with canola peptides. So what she did was extracted proteins from canola and chopped them into little pieces or peptides and fed those peptides to rats which had high blood pressure. And what she actually found is that some of those preparations reduce the blood pressure almost as low as the pharmaceutical control. So this is just common old canola proteins taken out, cut up into little pieces and acting almost as good as something that would go to the pharmacy to purchase to manage our blood pressure. Very exciting. So of course, the Holy Grail is trying to find solutions for cancer. And there's been a lot of research which has demonstrated that certainly diet has a big impact on reducing your chance of cancer. So some of the work that we've done here is to look at, well, what if we actually take extracts from grains and incubate them with cancer cells? Can we kill them? And we can. And so in this work that Sim did, she took some extracts from faba beans, she incubated them with cancer cells and normal cells, and it turns out just the cancer cells died. So we can specifically kill cancer cells with grain extracts. Heidi found the same thing, and Heidi was using chickpea extracts, and she was incubating them with these cancer cells. And what she found was that the more extract she added, the more cell death she saw. So what she's actually done here is she's initiated this process called apoptosis. And apoptosis is programmed cell death. And that's exactly what we want to do with cancer, is we want to turn on that trigger so that it basically goes into shutdown and dies. Similar thing with coloured rice. So in this project, we looked at a range of different rice varieties, extracted compounds from either normal brown rice or pigmented rice like purple rice. And what we found that actually in the normal brown rice, not too much happening there, but in the pigmented rice, actually we got some great levels of apoptosis, or the ability to kill the cancer cells. So there's something in those pigmented rice varieties which can specifically kill those cancer cells. Another area that we're interested in, of course, is our heart health. And one of the ways that we look at that is looking at this assay, which is a platelet aggregation assay. So platelets are these little things that float around in our blood, and they're great because they help patch up holes when we cut ourselves while the healing goes on. But unfortunately, if they go a little bit out of control, they can contribute to clot formation and heart attacks. So in some cases, if we're at risk of heart attack, it's a good idea to be able to moderate our platelet aggregation. And that's exactly what Borquay found, was that increasing amounts of black sorghum extracts could actually reduce platelet aggregation. So that's great news for people who are at risk at heart disease. Gideon also worked on extracts of coloured rice and found that it could actually interact with cells and actually turn genes on and off that regulate sugar in our body. So here's a way that we potentially in the future might be able to help moderate our glucose levels or moderate our diabetes through eating. So this last area, I guess, is very close to my heart because I'm really looking for that solution where I can still eat what I want, but not gain weight. And so we've had a bit of a focus on weight wellness. And one of the assays that we use is where we take these things called stem cells. So stem cells are basically just cells which haven't worked out what they're going to be when they grow up. And so we can take those stem cells, add some hormones, and turn them, in this case, into fat cells. And what we want to try and do is actually turn that process off. So we add our grain extracts and we see if we can actually, with different extracts, turn off the process of developing fat cells. And so what we found was that, again, with our normal rice, actually you can see where this red pigmentation is. That's fat deposits. And so it shows that in these ones we're not getting so much of an impact. But these ones here, what we can see is that we have actually turned off that fat cell development process. And we can see that because we don't see the development of fat cells in these particular samples here. And what we've worked out is that the extracts from purple and yunlu actually turn off a gene in those cells called PPAR gamma. And PPAR gamma is a gene which is a kind of a switch which turns the process on and off. So if we can turn that off, then we don't get fat cell development and potentially that can help us manage our weight. So in another study done by Zhongkai Zhou, we actually used rice bran, and this was normal rice bran from a brown rice. And what he did there was actually take that rice bran and treated it in a special way. And treated it in a way which increased the level of this compound called gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA. And we actually know quite a lot about GABA, and GABA is actually a neurotransmitter in our brain, but it's been demonstrated that if we consume that, it has lots of health benefits. And what we found is if we took that rice bran, which was enriched with GABA, and fed that to rats on a high-fat diet, compared to the control who put on weight quite quickly, actually the ones fed on bran and GABA-enriched bran didn't put on weight as quickly, which is really interesting. And what we found when we sacrificed those rats and looked at the organs and did blood analyses, we found that the ones who were fed on the GABA-enriched bran were much healthier in terms of their cholesterol levels, triglyceride levels, a whole range of biomarkers. So there's something really amazing going on here, and we've got a bit of a theory about this. And our theory is that actually we think that rice bran and GABA-enhanced rice bran is interacting with the gut microflora, so the bugs in our gut. And by doing that, the guts then send messages to the brain to say, we're not hungry anymore. And so potentially this might be an exciting way for us to manage our hunger cravings by eating food. How good is that? So the sad news is we are all dying, but the good news is we can delay our death by making good choices. And so hopefully from this presentation, you'll be able to take away that actually it's not the processors that are killing us, it's not the breeders that are killing us. We've got control over our own destiny, and all we have to do is make good choices. So I'd just like to finish by acknowledging my awesome team. This is some of them here. I'm really privileged to be able to work with some of the brightest up-and-coming food scientists who have just done amazing work in this space. I've got a wonderful group of collaborating academics and food professionals, and very privileged to be able to work with those. Now, before you go, I do have a present for everybody. If you do have your phones out and click on that QR code, you can download our latest cookbook, which has a lot of wonderful recipes in it, but also can give you a bit more information about our research. So thank you.